So hi, everyone. So today, as Raul just said, is all about credit cards. So this is going to be in two parts. So the first part is today. The next part will be same time next Wednesday, part two. So on the next slide, you'll see it's going to be in two chapters. So I'll come back to in more detail what we're going to cover today. But essentially today is the introduction. We'll be talking about what a credit card is, where you get it, whether you should even get one, that kind of thing. And then next week, we're going to talk about how to manage your credit card. So we'll be taking a look at a credit card statement. We'll be telling you how to manage your credit card. We'll be giving you information about things like your credit score, credit reports, and we're going to really explain to you how to make the credit card work for you so that you don't pay fees and interest, but also what to do if you end up with some kind of balance on your credit card, because you really want to avoid carrying that balance forward. Okay, so today we're going to be covering Introduction to Credit Cards. What is a credit card? Then we're going to tell you who can provide a credit card, who should get one, because honestly, not everybody is ready to get a credit card, and it can get you in big trouble if you don't manage it well. So we're going to ask you to think about why you want a credit card. There are some advantages and there are some serious disadvantages. We'll explain to you all the different kinds of features of a credit card. We'll also be telling you the kinds of fees, and there are many fees that you might get stuck with if you don't manage your credit card well. And along with that goes all sorts of interest charges. But on the other hand, many credit cards offer great rewards programs, and they can be really, really a good feature of your credit card. And we're also going to talk to you a little bit about introductory offers. So sometimes when you apply for a credit card, they'll give you some good features of your credit card just to get you interested, but those features may not last very long. Okay, so we're going to be covering all of that for you today. And on the next slide, what is a credit card? So a credit card is essentially a way to pay for things you buy electronically. It does let you buy it now and pay for it later. And that is usually within about 30 days. So it's not a lot later unless you don't pay the balance, in which case it can be later. But we'll be telling you why that's not a good thing. So in essence, you can sort of look at it as being a short-term loan from the credit card company. They sort of let you borrow the money for maybe a week or a few days, maybe up to a month, and then you pay the bill. It's a good way to pay for purchases both in person. You know, you go into the store and you either hand the clerk your credit card or you put it in the machine, but you can also pay online. So that can be very handy. Some people like to actually use their credit card because it keeps track of all their purchases. You can just get one statement every month, and then you pay the statement at the end of the month. So it's quite a good way to keep track of your purchases, as opposed to, you know, paying a little bit by cash, a little bit by debit card, and so on. It's all on the one statement, but then you have to be very, very disciplined and pay that bill off every single month. Okay, so Deb will now talk to you a little bit about credit cards and debit cards. Sorry, Bob will now talk to you a little bit about credit cards and debit cards.
That's okay. Well, sometimes people get confused about the difference between these two cards. And, well, yes, they're both plastic cards, and they are both ways to pay electronically. So it's a very convenient way to pay. But there's some important differences, and Anne was starting to touch on some of them. A credit card lets you buy now and pay later. With a debit card, you are paying immediately. It's electronic, but it's almost like handing over cash. A credit card is separate from your bank account. You don't need to have an account with your credit card company. With a debit card, the debit card is actually connected to your bank account, so very tight connection. And finally, to get a credit card, you actually have to apply for it, and it requires some kind of credit history. In other words, some demonstration, some example that you can show that you know how to manage your money. A debit card, what you need to use it is have money in your account. As long as you have money in your account, you can use your debit card. Okay, if we move to the next slide. So where do I get a credit card? The most obvious place to get a credit card is at a bank. And the most obvious two credit cards that are out there it's part of a big network, MasterCard or Visa. They are offered by many, many banks, and they are also widely accepted by many, many stores, which is why they're so convenient to use. But there are other financial institutions or credit card companies that offer credit cards. American Express and Discover are a couple of big companies that you may have heard of. And then many of the larger retail stores also offer store cards. For example, Target, Macy's, Kohl's, all of those stores have credit cards. The problem with them is you can only use them in that store, which is great if you shop there a lot, but you can't take your Target card and go to Giant and use it at Giant. So they have a limited use, but they can be handy, especially if you're a big fan of some particular store. And then finally, some of the real big retail stores, like Sears, have a credit card that is part of either a Visa or MasterCard network. So when you have a large store like that, that's part of the big network, then usually that card, even though it says Sears on it, for example, will be accepted in many other stores. So it's not that difficult to find organizations that provide credit cards. The bigger question is who should get a credit card? And it's rather simple, but also rather tricky. In the first place, people who have a good and regular income should get a credit card. And what does that mean? It means that in the first place, they have enough money to live fairly comfortably. They can make ends meet. They don't worry about paying the rent, for example. And the money comes in, their pay is regular in the sense that they get paid relatively frequently, not once or twice a year, for example, or sometimes they get a little money, sometimes you get a lot of money. It's predictable and it's coming in regularly. That's what that means. People who don't have much debt, why should that matter? Because actually a credit card creates debt. So obviously people who don't have very much debt can do a better job of managing when they get the debt from a credit card as a bill that they need to pay. And finally, people with a good credit history or credit score, because basically what that means is if you have a good credit history and credit score, you're good at managing money. You know how to watch for it. You know how to manage it. You are able to pay off your bills, and you don't get into trouble by having more debt than you can handle. So if we can go to the next slide. Anne? Anne, we can't hear you.
I think you've lost
Okay,
Anne. So you.
There's,
okay, I'm back.
Okay.
So the next question is, we've just talked about who should get a credit card, and now we're asking, why do I want a credit card? So these are questions you have to ask yourself. Some reasons that you might want a credit card might be to develop what's called a good credit history. We mentioned this a little bit previously, and we're going to talk a lot more about this next week, but your credit history is very valuable when you're asking the bank for all sorts of things, including a credit card or maybe a loan for a car or college or something. Your credit history will be important, and we'll talk about that next week. Sometimes people just want a credit card for use in emergencies, right? They think they're managing well. They manage, expenses every month. They don't have a lot of debt or money that they owe, but maybe they just think, ooh, I might have an emergency. I might suddenly have my car need repair, and it's going to cost more money than I can easily pay back straight away. So, it can be good to use just to keep for emergencies. As I mentioned before, some people like to have a credit card so that it keeps better track of all their purchases every month. If you pay for things using various payment means, like as Bob just mentioned, debit card, cash, check, you have to keep all the little receipts. It's not easy to keep track of what you're spending every month. If you just get the one credit card statement every month, you can see everything that you've bought, and you pay it all in one bill when you pay that credit card statement. So some people do like to do that just to keep track of what they're spending each month. And we'll talk a bit more about this later, but as I mentioned before, many credit cards do have great rewards, and this can be a good way sometimes of saving up some benefits or saving up some actual cash back, which can be very handy. I personally like to do that. I get cash back and I save up my rewards, and I just get them back once a year, and it's usually a nice little sum of money that I can do something with. So on the next slide, we're talking about the advantages of your credit card. It does give you extra time to pay for things. As Bob mentioned, with a debit card or cash, you're paying straight away. And with a check, you might get a few days before the check clears, but it certainly is not usually longer than a few days. You do get to pay for all your purchases together at the end of every month. It does give you a great credit history. And another important thing is that credit cards usually offer better protection in case of fraud or loss than debit cards. This is because sometimes if you lose your debit card or there's fraud, it may be that you don't even know about it until it's too late, and the bank cannot usually get back that money for you once it's gone. However, with a credit card, usually all you have to do, say for example, you lose it, you're in the store and it just falls out, and you pay for something and you lose it, and somebody finds it and tries to use it. As long as you let the credit card company know fairly quickly that you've lost it or you think it's been stolen, they will cover the loss. You are not responsible for somebody else using your credit card. Okay, same thing can happen. The credit card company may call you if there's some suspicious activity. I remember our credit card company called us once because we actually bought some furniture, and we had never bought furniture before on our credit card. So they called us to make sure it was us. And if it was not us, they would have stopped that transaction and we would not have been responsible for it. So that is actually quite a good protection for you to have. It means that you're not usually responsible for anybody else using your credit card. On the other hand, there are some disadvantages. The biggest disadvantage, and I can't stress this enough, is that it's very easy to spend more than you can afford to pay back. So we'll talk a little bit in a minute about credit lines and about you having a limit on what you can spend on your credit card. But the credit line is not usually small. And so usually you will be able to spend, a little bit more money than you actually might spend if you realized you were spending cash. So you have to be very disciplined. You have to be really careful that you do not spend more than you can afford to pay back every month. If you do that and spend too much money and you can't manage your account well, you owe more than you can afford to pay back, there will be fees. We'll talk about this in a minute. The fees can be quite large. So you really have to be very disciplined with this credit card. There are also high interest costs that kick in the minute that you don't pay it all back every month. And again, those interest rates can be really quite large and they can mount up very quickly. And if you're getting a credit card, and part of the reason is that you want to get yourself a good credit history by managing your card well, on the other hand, you can also destroy your good credit history if you don't manage your account well. So again, you've got to be very, very careful that you are aware of all these disadvantages, which can be really big disadvantages from not managing your credit card well. All right, so back to Bob to talk about some features of the credit cards.
Well, Anne mentioned one, the top one here, the spending limit or the credit line. When you get a credit card, you will be told the amount that you're allowed to borrow, and that is the credit line or the limit. In other words, you might see that your credit card company has given you a line of $5,000, and you're thrilled. And that means you can use and buy up to $5,000 worth of whatever you want. That's the maximum you can charge on your credit card. And if you try to spend more than that before paying that amount down, the credit card company will prevent you from, it will block that purchase. And the store won't be able to process your credit card charge. So that's the way that happens. There are, as Anne also mentioned, there are fees. The fees, the first is the possibility of an annual fee. This may not be as frequent as it was in the past, but there are some cards that charge you once a year to have the card. Sometimes it's associated with some benefit that you get with that particular card. But more frequent and more problematic are late fees and penalty fees. Now, these are fees that you have to pay if you make your payment, credit card payment late. And if you don't pay enough, because the credit card company will send you a bill that says, perhaps you have spent your $5,000, but they will say you must pay at least, and then give you an amount that is less than the 5,000. If you don't pay that amount, there will be a penalty for that as well. So it's not just being late, but it's when you don't pay enough of the bill. And finally, and probably the one that most people are well aware of, is the interest rate. Now, the interest rate, and it's you probably have heard this APR, those three initials. Basically, that represents the percent amount charged for what is being borrowed. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So just keep in mind at this point that besides the fees, the interest rate is probably the biggest problem that needs to be managed if you're not paying off what you owe. But other features, so we've talked about the restrictions and the problems, but other features are the rewards program, and different credit card companies offer different programs. And then what's called the introductory offer, and we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail in a minute. Okay, so types of interest charges. So the first is relative to when you open your account. There are some credit card companies that will give you a good deal on the interest rate. In other words, they'll say, if the normal interest rate is 15%, we won't charge you, we'll charge you 5%, or maybe we won't even charge you that first month or two. So that is it's an example really of an introductory offer, and it won't last, but it is a type of interest charge. It's that could be part of your credit card company's offer to you. More common is this annual percentage rate, APR, and the percent is used to figure the dollar amount of interest you will pay. Now, how does that work? Credit card companies are required to indicate what their APR, that percent number, is right now, with interest rates at a very, very low level in this country. I checked my credit cards and they were in the 15 to 20% range. That is not a low amount of money to pay. Now, if you use your credit card and when you get your bill, you pay the full amount off, you will not owe any interest. They will not charge you for interest. In other words, that amount of time, as Ann talked to you earlier, that you had that delay in paying for roughly up to a month, is not a charge that you have to pay. You don't have to pay any interest on that amount. However, if you can't pay that whole balance off, then the credit card company will begin to charge interest on what you don't pay off. On top of that, there is something known as a penalty APR, and this is an even higher amount of interest if you don't pay that minimum payment that the credit card company expects you to pay. How high can this go? This can go up, at least the credit card companies that I've worked with, it can go up at this point to 30%. So perhaps twice what the normal rate would be, extremely high. So absolutely critical that if you cannot pay off the whole balance, that at least you pay the minimum. Okay, if we can move on to the next slide. But let's talk about the good news, and that's the type of rewards programs. And many credit card companies offer a rewards program. And what's important is for you to think about what kind of rewards are important to you. For example, one of the obvious and well-known benefits is this free miles for travel on airplanes. And as Ann mentioned, there's also the cash back option that some credit card companies offer. I'm with Ann. I like the money. I did have a credit card with a company that offered the free miles, and I discovered, well, but I can't travel when I can use those free miles. Well, the airline kept adding more and more restrictions. So I thought, I'll take the money. But it can be a very good option for people who do travel and have some flexibility in when they travel. There are other rewards as well. When you think about some of those stores like Target or Sears, there may be free merchandise, there may be gift certificates, and that might be something that is very appealing to you. So you always want to find out what those rewards might be for the credit card that you're looking at. And if we can go on to the next slide.
All right, so let's now talk about this introductory offer that we've mentioned a couple of times. So the introductory offer, some of the features might be, as Bob said, It can affect the fees, the interest rate, the rewards, and so on. But the important thing to notice first is that it is only temporary. So it's for a very limited period of time. It's usually a few months, maybe 3 or 6 months. Occasionally, I did know one credit card where it was actually the introductory offer lasted for a whole year, but usually it's shorter than that, and it's relatively short. So one of the problems is that you can get used to there being no interest or a very low interest rate, and you can get in the bad habit of saying, well, it's not going to cost me very much because the interest rate is so low, so I'll carry that balance forward. Okay, you do not want to get in that habit. So that is the sort of the downside of introductory offers, is that sometimes it can help you get into bad habits that you then have to break really quickly when that interest rate might shoot up from no interest or 5% interest to 15% interest. So things do change, and the introductory offer, you will be given a statement that will tell you, you know, you can have this benefit, but it will only last this long. And after that, this is what will happen. So if there is an introductory offer, you need to read that paperwork really, really carefully to know what's going to happen once that introductory period of time is over. And some examples specifically are that there may be, as Bob already said, no fees or very low fees, no interest rate even, or a very low interest rate. There may be better rewards. So that's to encourage you to do more spending. So you might get, for example, double cash back if you choose a cash back reward. It might be doubled in the first 3 months. Okay, the reason for that is obviously to encourage you to get this card and spend a lot of money on it. All right, so again, be very careful. And it may give you a higher credit line or credit limit just for a short period of time. Again, these are all things to encourage you to get that card, but also to spend more money on it. Be very careful that you get into bad habits, again, when you have this credit card with this great preliminary offer. Don't let that happen to you. Be very aware of how long the offer lasts for and what's going to happen when the introductory period is over. All right, so that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So here again is what we covered today. We did talk about what a credit card is. We talked at length about who can provide that credit card. So when you're making a choice, say, I think I want to get a credit card, look into it and make a decision about what kind of credit card you want based on what kind of expenses you're going to put on your credit card. Okay? Again, there were a couple of choices. You can get it from a bank or other financial institution. You can get a store card that is only able to be used in that store, or you can get a store card from a bigger network like Visa or MasterCard. Okay, so think about that carefully. We told you who should get a credit card. And there are some things, you know, you should have a regular income, for instance. You should be sure you can pay it off every month. That is the most important thing. You should have the discipline to be able to not carry a balance forward, except possibly in an emergency. Okay, that might be the only time really you should have to carry a balance forward. And even then, you have to know that you can pay it back quickly. You have to ask yourself why you want a credit card, and there has to be a good reason, and you have to be sure you can manage it well, because there are some great advantages, but there are also some very big disadvantages. There are many features. So we told you about the kinds of fees and interest charges. That's the downside. The upside is the really good rewards programs. You know, like again, some cashback features, they will offer you, as Bob mentioned, up to 5% cash back. So if you let that grow in your credit card account and don't touch it for a year, you know, you might get back some quite good money that then you can either use to pay off your credit card, or they will actually send you the money in a check and you can use it for something else. And again, introductory offers can be great, but do be a little bit careful, because they can give you a false sense of you're managing things great, and then 3 to 6 months later things change and you have to be much more disciplined about managing your card. Okay, so that's all the actual information we're going to give you today. And now I'm going to turn it over to Deb, who's going to give you on our next slide, we're going to give you a little story about a lady who is thinking about should she get a credit card. And you're going to be telling us whether or not you think she should. So take it from here, Deb.
Okay, so there's been a lot of information that Barb and Ann just shared with you about credit cards. And we have an example here, and we want to talk about the good reasons to have a credit card and the bad reasons for this particular person. So let's just talk about Susie. Susie is 23 years old. She just graduated from college and she just got her first job. So she has to move to a different state. So she grew up in Maryland, and she has to go to a different part of the country, and she's thinking about having a credit card. So she had a bank account and a debit card the whole time she was in college. Now remember, a debit card is a little different because it takes money straight out of your account. And most of the time she did that pretty well. But in her first year, before she learned how to manage it really, really well, she's put some money, or tried to put some money on her debit card when she didn't have enough money in the account. And so she wasn't keeping track of her spending, and she was overdrawn. And if you were at some of our other talks, you remember that overdrawn means that you used more money than you had in the account. So not good. So she did that a couple times the first year she was in college, but after that she managed it pretty well. And the last 2 bullets are about why she wants a credit card. She wants to buy some furniture for her new apartment when she moves, and she also wants some new clothes for her job. And then she thinks that if she gets a credit card and she puts these expenses on her credit card, she would feel really good about moving, and she would really feel good about her job, and she would really feel good about herself. So now I'm going to ask you to either raise your hand and talk to us, or put it in the chat line of whether you think it's a good idea for Susie to have a credit card or not. And I'm going to tell you that there are good reasons and there are some not so good reasons. So we want to talk about both of those things, okay? Anybody want to help us out? Okay, so Smita says she should not because she's not responsible. Okay, that's a good thing. Yeah, she wasn't responsible before. She's being a little bit more responsible now. So that's kind of balancing out a little bit. Okay, who else wants to weigh in? Oh, so Karen, you think it's a good idea? Because why? Anybody think it's a good idea? Okay, it might be a good idea because she's going to need to buy a lot of stuff in a little bit amount of time. And she might remember when Ann and Barb talked to you about some of the advantages of a credit card is that you can stretch out the payments, that you can put things on your credit card and you don't have to pay for them right away. So that might be a good reason for her to have a credit card. And it might be a good reason for her to have a credit card since she learned how to manage her money a little bit better. And it might not be a great idea if she goes a little crazy, right? if she just tries to buy too many things all at once. Right? Yeah. So let me ask everybody here, who has a credit card? Just raise your hand if you have a credit card, or if you're not on camera, give us a text. Okay, so we have quite a few people who have credit cards. Okay, so tell me a little bit about how you manage your credit card. How do you do with your credit card? Paying it every month is very, very important. Yes. Good job. And track it every month too. Yeah, really good. Yep, paying every month. Okay, you guys are doing a very good job. So I think what you want to do is help us think about some of those things for next week, because we're going to talk about managing the credit cards more next week. And we're going to have some more examples too. We're going to have some more stories about different people and how they're managing. And if you tune in next week at the same time, I think Ann and Barb and I will be here to talk to you about some more of those things. Okay? Sound good? All right. Raul, you want to tie us up, finish us out?
It looks like we have a few latecomers. Elizabeth has just joined us as well. Hi, Elizabeth. Hello? Hey, Elizabeth? She's still connecting. If you are late in joining the class, I can always share the slides with you as I've done in the past. We might not have access to share the video right away. I can definitely share the slides for you to have them to study for next week, which would be part 2 of the credit card presentation. Does anybody have any questions for today's material?
So Raul, there's going to be, they can watch this online too, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so if you want to watch it again, Raul's going to give you a link for that, and he will send the slides out. And then we'll see you next week for part 2.